we move over here and we wait for everything to like work. Hello. Excuse me as I just pull up the chat on my phone because single monitor style is painful. You know how we do shit. All right, and we're live. So it seems anyways. How are we all doing this lovely... What is today? What day is it? Is it Saturday? How are we doing this? What day is it? Unironically. Wednesday, holy shit, okay. Happy Wednesday, everyone. How are we all doing? Josh, Jake, welcome to the chat. Noob, Bomb, you know how we do shit. Today we are reacting to my latest upload, which, I'll be honest, kind of bombed. People are just tired of the subjective objective stuff. I don't blame you. I'm tired too. I was right since the first video. I don't know why motherfuckers keep challenging me on points that are incontestable. You can't argue with this guy, man. I'm just fucking too smart. But let it be known that this will probably be my last kind of video on the topic. I've argued till I'm blue in the face with people in different comment sections. I have altered my theory, I guess, over the last year, but nothing substantially. It's like minor addendums. In this video, this was kind of like my last big hurrah on it. But unfortunately, I'm disappointed in two respects. For one, I just fucking, as a video, I think the quality kind of not great. But my arguments were actually ass in this video, and that's why I wanted to do a recap to try and like correct some things, and maybe address some points of Kreams that just kind of slid by without me saying anything about. So, yeah, it's gonna be a long stream, but I hope you are all, you know, I see Josh is on big work vibe, and that's cool, so throw this on in the background and just get some work done. I appreciate the watch time. That's the other reason we do these streams, so we can get monetized soon. Argue maybe, but not debate. That's another story. I mean both. I'm tired of both, and people are too. People are just tired of these long videos. All because of Sod? Kind of, yeah. I mean, Sod is definitely the one that knows how to trigger me the most. And it's just frustrating because I know I am right, and he essentially just says no, and it just bothers me. I'm like, bro, please give me something here. I want to. He feels so strongly about his position, yet here we go. He certainly does not offer any counter arguments, and that's frustrating to me. But I think even in the comment section of this video, which I might review a bit later as well, I know Noob left a big comment I haven't replied to yet. So I might review some of the comments. I'm still arguing with Sod and them in here. And in my opinion, I give my best and shortest, sweetest account of art is subjective in this comment section. He's just annoying. Yeah, Sod is very annoying. Sod is very annoying. He will just like bring up, like, I remember I said I didn't like most things in Shonen Jump recently, and Sod's like, yes, that is your own particular unique experience, independent of anybody else. I'm like, the fucking sky's blue. Yeah, what else? Duh, I'm breathing right now. I typed this on Twitter. What, you want to point out anything else that could be more obvious? Of course, it's my own experience with these manga. Or he'll quote retweet you and say, follow me. Sorry, but this video is not about Sod. If Sod comes in, though, I might not ignore him. I ignored him. I explicitly ignored him last time because he's always like, I exist, you know? And just to kind of deny him the existence, I just ignore him. But today I'm feeling charitable. Anyways, I'm going to get into this video. Let me know how the audio is, but otherwise, like, let's just fucking do this. Welcome to the Creamy Pie, and my name is Doofy Screaming Match. Today we're going to be reacting to the first episode of Honored Ones, a very particular portion of it where they talk about my favorite subject and one that you guys are not tired of yet. Subjectivity versus objectivity. I'm the world's funniest man. Like, you can't make intros like this on the spot this fucking good. That's why you all gotta subscribe to My Name's Doofy, right? Road to 1K. No one makes intros like him. It got way more podcast-like. Yes, I agree. This, to be clear also, this wasn't entirely framed like a debate. The initial request to Kreams was like, let's come on my channel and let's talk about the video. I edited out the video, though, because it was literally us reacting to the Honor Ones podcast. Mainly because, one, the audio between, like, him talking in this Discord call and the audio in the video we were reacting to was like the same, so it got confusing. Plus, he just simply recaps his positions anyway, so I cut all that out just to kind of trim down the video a little more. So this was like never explicitly like a debate. Like we knew we had different ideas on the topic, but we were just, it wasn't like same with like Tron or Sod, where it was more supposed to be a debate, I guess. And you can see very quickly, I think like by here, it does kind of become very podcasty, like Noob says. I have to ignore Sod 90% of the time. Yeah, absolutely. But so yeah, again, I just feel like maybe if I was more like, if I tried to stress either the debate or the conversation side of things, like initially when I asked Kreams to do this, maybe it would have went, I think, a little better. I think maybe even just of doing a podcast through and through would have been better. I did come into it almost like it was going to be a debate, but it turns out very quickly that my arguments weren't good enough to really have that debate for some reason, even though this is literally all I've talked about for like 6 months. But again, moving forward, I also love, I know, new content every week. But anyways, welcome to the channel, Creamy Pie.
Thanks. It's good. I think it's good to be here.
Audio good on your guys' end, by the way? I did a test earlier and it's fine, but...
So I can give you the full detailed answer if you want.
Yeah, I'll hear it.
So I went to school in a... Trying to make it sound like I didn't go to an art school. Like I didn't, right? But I took a bunch of art classes. Like I just happened to.
I'm glad it sounds good.
And one of them was this film class, right? And out of all the general ed, science, math, everything classes, no professor was more of a stickler than my film professor. And I hated this guy's guts to the very bitter end.
I'm just gonna skip it forward a little bit, and I'll try and recap his argument because I know most of you probably already watched the video, and I don't want you to have to just go through it again. Essentially, what he's saying is that in Kreams, I'm fairly confident this is your position. It'd probably be better to just show it so that I don't misrepresent you. But by the way, this is where you got off track. You started getting too charitable because of the antidote. Yeah, I agree. Even Narj is kind of like, well, Narj I don't think says I'm too charitable when I do like these debate kind of things. He just says that like I let the other person go on too long and they get away with a lot more. And actually, no, he also says that I concede too much, that I don't need to, and it just looks bad for giving up all this ground that I just don't have to. So that's something that I definitely would like to work on. But essentially what he's saying here is that he had an art professor or film professor that was like, the best way to get results, to produce a better, I don't know, sitcom or something, is to use these kind of conventional elements that have been used traditionally. Therefore, conventions are objectively good, something along those lines. Let's just skip a little bit to the end there.
The necessity of the action you're doing to tell the story you're trying to tell and the medium you're trying to tell it is very much set in stone.
I mean, you're gesturing to the fact that like these conventions are very optimized. When you clap them, make sure they're stuck and annoyed when you clap them. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So again, all I'm pointing out here, and I think the argument starts fine. He's essentially saying that like conventions help us make art easier, which I agree. Like conventions are optimized, they are abstracted from a history. Or let me try and put this in more simple terms. Conventions are conventions because they are used time and time again. So the fact that and let's look at manga for instance, the fact that like the kind of goofy, aloof protagonist like Goku or Naruto appears with every new generation of battle shonen is because this is just an effective vehicle for conveying certain themes and for moving certain plot points along in the overall narrative. So this is like a pre-packaged, already thought out kind of character arc that we know is effective. And so by using that, we can more effectively tell our own story. We can use these in more effective ways. That's kind of like conventions, right? These are optimized. They have a proven history of working well. So I absolutely agree. I think that archetypes, cliches, tropes, conventions generally are useful. They're optimized, right? They have a whole history of like figuring out what works the best, and that's why we keep using them. I do think there's one thing, Doofy, when you talk about this topic, you say just objectively, you do not explain the word enough, and nobody usually has a good understanding in the definition. Yeah, I also agree. Just trying to, I guess, I don't want to say dumb down, but just like be more pointed with what I mean. My thing is I just assume everyone's watched my video I already made on the topic, and I just assume they know it all as well as me, which is not the point, and I think that's why I don't convince enough people. I'm using all this flowery language that they just can't resonate with, so they just don't know what I'm talking about, I think. I don't think Kreams is in that position, but I think just like at a larger scale, I'd be winning more people over with more pointed language. Doofy, also you have to be a sick and do what I do, make other people define their words regularly. Another good point, I absolutely agree. And let's just see how I could have done that here. Because they have like a whole history of development behind them, which again, like I'm totally on board with. But actually, I even cut out a part there. It was literally just like 3 words. I said I was totally on board with, and I concede that. And I hate that I always say I concede this, because it's just like, what? It's unnecessary. It looks bad. Like I don't need to. You know what I mean? Like I should have immediately pointed out that this is already off topic of what we're trying to get at. That is the objectivity of evaluation. Here he's just talking about conventions are optimized and they help us make art more effectively or quickly or more conveniently, which is like, yeah, absolutely. But that has nothing to do with goodness. And that's, again, maybe I just didn't even realize that we were already off track here. Like I just get too absorbed in what they're saying and I don't realize the bigger picture. So again, like I'm not trying to undermine the value of them. I think there's obvious value to be getting out of. It took me 3 videos to get a really good understanding. That's fair. At least in more recent times, I try to just straight up define it as, like, I try to emphasize that when we have conventions, it's because a community of subjects agree on them. And that's all I mean by intersubjective, by the way. Is the word, okay, let me ask you guys this. Is the word subject even a little like unclear? Like when I refer to individuals as subjects, is that, to me, that's about as basic as it can get, but I'm starting to think now that that might even be too loaded for certain people and they might not understand exactly what I mean. Debate them like when you debate me. Yeah, but like I'm trying to make like friends out here, Snow. If I'm fucking debating them like I debate you, I'd have no friends because we're so fucking aggressive. Because it's all like, again, like we understand it's in the realm of ideas, but like I feel like for most people that can a debate about ideas can very easily extend to a debate about people if you kind of catch what I mean there. And that's why maybe what I'm also always worrying about. I think I'm also like subconsciously holding myself back because I don't want to just like be fucking hyper aggressive with everyone, even though I think I just should be. Honestly, I think it's a bad look to be like so soft and just give everything away. I gotta really work on that. Like, if you don't use subject, then you would speak at a level meant for monkeys. Yeah, I agree. But should I be trying to convince monkeys of, art is subjective? I feel like at a certain point, you're just not going to convince a certain crowd. And I don't know if I'm willing to abandon talk of the subject. You know what I mean? Obviously, when I mean subject, I mean an individual who has a mind. Maybe that's the most basic way to put it. Because when I talk about subjectivity, I mean something in the mind of a subject, something in the mind of an individual, something in the mind of a viewer, okay? That's all I mean by subject, like an individual with a mind, a human viewer, a person engaging in some art. It's traditionally understood that a subject is in relation to some object, usually. That's where you get the subject-object dichotomy. And that's probably going a little overboard, I think, in terms of expecting people to understand that automatically. But that's like the basic structure of knowledge. I, the subject, am in some relation with with an object, right? Subject knows the object. It's the same thing with language, right? That's why we have the subject in a sentence and an object, and of course a predicate or some verb. I mean, in the middle. But anyways, that's kind of getting off the side point. Again, anything that you guys can say in the live chat that's constructive, how this could have went better, please let me know. This is a learning experience for all of us, me especially. So I really do appreciate all of you guys' comments, because I'm so in deep with my own theory that I just assume that everyone's at that same point of richness, has the same vocabulary to describe these things, and it's just not the case. And I feel like I lose so many people because I just say things that are significant, but they don't get it, or the way I say it, they just kind of just brush it off because it doesn't seem that important because I say it so nonchalantly sometimes. Sorry, I'm just checking my thingy. Anyways, moving on. Of like using something that's been proven time and time again to produce like effective results. I mean, just like in the most practical sense, like grammar is conventional, but it helps us shape our writing in like the most optimum way, so it's clear and not vague or ambiguous. I really like that example with writing being conventional, because I know from experience people have tried to say, well, you know, would you say that grammar's not objective then? Like people have leveraged grammar as an example against art being subjective, but they don't understand that grammar is the perfect example of what I mean by conventional. Because, for instance, take I don't know how well you guys know grammar at all, but there's this kind of common rule that you should not end sentences with prepositions in English. So you shouldn't end a sentence with is or of, for instance. Now, why exactly? Does that add some kind of clarity to your sentence? Does that make things less vague or ambiguous? No. Do you want to know why we don't want to end sentences in English with prepositions? It's because academics wanted English to be more scholarly. They wanted it to be more like Latin. And in Latin, it's impossible to end a sentence with a preposition just because of the way the language is structured, like the syntax of the language. Therefore, it was impossible there. They want to create that kind of scholarly feel with English, and so they made it a rule. But like this doesn't actually do anything useful for English. Like in my opinion, it's actually sometimes less clear when you have a sentence that doesn't end in a preposition that could have. So this is just an example of how it's arbitrary, and it's only a convention because we chose it to be. So it's subjective also. Arbitrary just meaning like it could have been anything else. It's not necessary. Convention, I guess, it's just something we, as a group of people, choose to do. And it's only important because we choose to do it. What is your goal in talking to these people? Debate and win, or convince them? Convince them, I think. Yeah, I think I'd like to convince them. So yeah. There's, again, conventions are useful, like they're very practical. Again,
just tools.
Yeah,
tools.
They are tools. Right, they are tools. Yeah, okay. My impression when I first watched that video was that like you were thinking like this is just how comedies are. If it doesn't fit that, it's not a comedy. So for context, and I think that maybe including the part of the video in here would have made it a little bit clearer. But in the original video, he says something to the effect of that like a comedy just has this kind of structure with A plot, B plot, C plot, D plot, whatever. And to me, I was taking that as like this is just a rigid definition of what comedy is. And I don't know why I saw that as a problem, because then we're just getting into definitions, right? And I don't feel like that's an issue. But let's just proceed and see where this goes. But what you're saying is that there's just like these conventions that guide us in making something in a much more optimized way. It typically has these commonalities. This is ultimately like why comedies normally will have the structure, because it follows these conventions. I mean, obviously, if you're all using the same conventions, shit's going to be really similar. But at least this opens up the room for somebody to do something slightly different that might end up changing how you do comedies moving forward. Might change the conventions thereafter. And yeah, again, so it's just a little difference that...
Yeah, but...
Yeah, I thought originally he was saying that, like, if it doesn't have these conditions, it's not a comedy. But I think what he was really trying to say was that these conventions help us make the most effective comedy. And that's kind of why comedy is defined, you know, in terms of these conventions, if that makes sense. I feel like my arguments through writing and when me talking are completely different. Always, right? Because you have more time to think and reflect and correct when you are writing, not so much in live time. Then do what you do, but cut them off when they say something wrong and make them define things. That's all you need to do. Yeah, W. Now on PC Pog, nice.
But I think my the point I was trying to come across was, for if you were to take the general structure of a sitcom, a sitcom is 70s, 80s, whatever. It still all falls into the realm of sitcom, right? But there are certain flavors to it that don't violate the structure. So, for example, a sitcom like Friends.
So I'm probably gonna skip past this part because I think we all agree. Well, for one, this is again kind of off topic, and I don't know why. I don't know how we keep going off topic. Again, this is just me lacking, I guess, a kind of awareness of where I want the discussion to go. But we essentially went, there are conventions, they're effective in helping us make things easier, I guess. Also, different forms of media have definitions, and if you don't meet those criteria, you aren't that form of media. So that's when I give the example, like, if you are a manga, you need to be illustrated. Like, again, that's just a condition of being a manga, like, objectively. That's just how it is. Likewise, to be a comedy, like, you have to, like, make people laugh, something like that. Like, definitions, objective, whatever. Like, okay, yeah, this is a pretty moot point. I'm not sure where this is, what role this plays in the discussion about art being objective. So let's just skip along a little bit and get back to this last part here. Not very important, but if you listen to the new Worst Party Ever album, no. Is it any good? Because I've only ever heard like singles from them and I didn't really like them. Or at least they would pop up at random times in my like Spotify pop punk playlists. Things you want to give the readers that you're expecting them to want. Emo. Again, this is like just a practical point. I don't think this contributes. Your arguments are always rock solid, and I only ever have very minor problems with them, so make sure people hear them and understand them with definitions. You're a very great speaker and very educated. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think definitions is my weak point. It's really not bad. Oh, nice. I'll have to check it out then. It's to like something being objectively good. I think this is an observable phenomena amongst mangaka, but no, if you have something to add on that, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a pretty important part that I wish I had more arguments to expand upon. So let's just listen to this now.
I've managed to boil it down to I think a pretty good summation. I might end up like having to add addendums to this. Like I know I'm gonna be furious. I'm like I definitely missed the way to like phrase it, but as best as I have it right now at this very present moment, if humans physiologically, right, just feel more at peace with seeing the color blue, like assuming they're not colorblind or blind or anything, like just you know default skin, jeez, like default human being, right? Default human being.
Default skin is pretty funny.
Everything is like dead average.
Yeah.
The masses, if you will. If you were to take them and take all of them and say 100% of you, just physiologically speaking, can't help but feel more relaxed when you see the color blue, doesn't that mean that the color blue's effect is objectively good?
Yeah, okay. So I have a much better way to counter this argument now. I think it's a fairly intuitive argument, so getting the counter right is very important. The argument essentially is, okay, so this thing evokes a specific physiological reaction. So the presence of a certain trope in anime or manga evokes excitement in me. It raises my heart rate. And we can expect this to happen most of the time across, you know, an average mass of people. Also, welcome Kage. So given that, can we not then say that the existence of this trope, which causes that physiological reaction, is therefore objectively good? And this is, I think, a very common argument, but a very problematic one. Because essentially, what you're not accounting for is how you go from the existence of some observable phenomena, right? How you go from the existence of some objective thing, in this case, the trope in the anime and the corresponding reaction from the individual. You're not going from how that reaction equals good. And that's something that you can't account for on this kind of naturalist approach, you might say. You can't derive from nature that the existence of some phenomena, like your heart fluttering, is good. Nature does not provide you with any kind of prescription, any normative statement, right? It doesn't tell you that this is, therefore it should be this way. And I'll give you a few counterexamples that I think will help illustrate what I mean by this. So for instance, you could objectively observe right now that Doofy drinks alcohol 5 nights a week. He just does, and he's done that for a long time. This is an objective phenomenon we can experience about Doofy for a long time, okay? So from that, you say, because he drinks 5 nights a week, therefore he should drink 5 nights a week. I think most people would say that's not, like, people would have questions about how you make that conclusion. And the reason for that is because intuitively that conclusion is bad to them. Because it's, it's bad for their health, it's bad on their wallet, it's expensive, so on and so forth. What this doesn't account for is whether or not something in existence is good or bad. You are the individual making that connection. It's not in nature. It doesn't exist independent of you saying it. So I think trying to... I think that ultimately that kind of naturalist approach doesn't work. And it doesn't, like, across the board. It's what it's called the is-ought fallacy. David Hume is famous for, like, identifying this. And I'll give one other example, because I feel like people might still say, like, this isn't exactly analogous, but consider this example. So, like, babies, by nature, just want to put stuff in their mouth. Like, it's not that they want to, they do. Babies will just take random things and, like, stuff it in their mouth. They love doing it. They're weirdos. And this is an observable phenomena about babies across all, like, all cultures, all times and places in recorded history. Babies just have this weird fixation about their mouth. So, that said, one might conclude, therefore, that it is good for babies to put stuff in their mouth and to keep doing that throughout, their life. But the problem with that, of course, is that if babies continue to just put stuff in their mouth, they're inevitably going to put something poisonous in their mouth. That's, that endangers their life. And, of course, most people would think that's bad. So, I think these two examples should suffice to demonstrate why just because something happens a lot doesn't mean it's good. It also doesn't mean it's bad. But ultimately, you individually have to decide. You have to make a connection between some objective occurrence with your idea of what's good or bad, based on your values, your presuppositions, so on and so forth. And that's the is-ought fallacy. And I didn't have any good explanation as to how it works, and I feel like that's why it lost a lot of its force when I tried to point it out. But I think that kind of demonstrates it. So let's just see what chat's saying. Doofy, I just thought of a great example. Goosebumps can come from a great moment or a cringe one. Hey, that's a good one. Yeah, exactly. So we get... Sorry, my mom just messaged me something very strange. Do you know when a dog eyes fuckers a lot, what's that a sign of? A little Yorkie. What? For one, I think she meant to type that into Google. And for two, flickers a lot? Yeah, she is a house care worker for an older woman with a Yorkie, I think. And maybe that's why. That's weird. Yeah, Goosebumps is a good example because, of course, you can equally get goosebumps from excitement, from sexual arousal, from cringe. So there are different kinds of things we might associate with goosebumps. So that's another issue with perhaps the kind of naturalist account. Kreams, hello, brother. Hey, I'm at work, so I can't really fully respond, but I just wanted to say it was a lot of fun to sit down with you. I'd love to do it again sometime, hopefully not about the topic. Absolutely, it was a blast. If only I was fucking better articulate in this video. Heart from Josh. Nah, Doofy, argument sound. If you don't think that much, then fundamentally you are not Doofy. Flickers, yeah. Anyways, that's the is-ought fallacy. Nature does not tell you how things should be. Nature just tells you how things are. Now, a lot of people, I think the reason I use the baby example is because, well, if babies by nature do this thing, and are created from nature, isn't it in their best interest to do that thing? Right? It's from nature, by nature, for nature kind of thing. But it's just simply not the case. And I think the baby example is a good example of that because they want to put everything in their mouth, but I think we can make equal arguments as to why that's bad and good. So again, all this to just emphasize that ultimately, just because something is doesn't make it right. maybe there's one other way I can think to express this, and this is an example I give in other videos. For example, the hero's journey is like one of the most basic narrative patterns of all time. It's found all across, recorded histories of epics, ballads, stories from as far as we have in recorded history. And it's practically the basic format of a battle shonen as well, but action series more generally. So that said, we can say probably with confidence that this pattern exists thousands of times across stories. Does that make this pattern objectively good? Well, no, of course not, because no matter how many instances you have of this trope, okay, we can't then say that it is good or bad, because there are very good arguments for saying that this is a kind of boring and repetitive archetype that should be put away. But then there are also good arguments as to why it's effective and it can help move a story along in a more intuitive way. So there are strong arguments on both ends. It just depends on which you buy into, and then accordingly whether or not you ascribe a value to it, like if it's good or bad. So, does that all make sense? Like, do you think this is a clear enough articulation of the is-ought fallacy to, I think, sufficiently remove, this concern here, that because exciting moments in manga flutter my heart, that it is therefore objectively good? Do you think we've sufficiently taken that claim down? I think so. I could not imagine another counter to what I've just said. Duve nature has fucked up some animals. There's this boar who has tusks that grow constantly and doesn't wear off. It does them. And they breed by selecting who has the best trunks. Nature fucked them. Okay, interesting. I'm also just trying to think about... I think we've sufficiently taken care of this claim. Now, this is the other thing that I think people get confused about. So, there might be some underlying fact of the matter about certain things in anime and manga evoking a particular response in the individual. So, it might be the case that certain archetypes, such as the underdog, I guess, in an anime fight, that just gets people generally excited. A majority of the population, you might say, okay? Holy fuck, I'm getting like the most notifications I've ever had in my life all of a sudden for some reason. And okay, so just to go back to that, the underdog trope probably invokes a lot of excitement across most people, like 60% we might just say, or even like 55%. Because of that, people generally hold like this kind of underdog archetype to be something good. Because this group of people decide that this trope is good, it is subjectively good. It is intersubjectively good. And by intersubjectively, I mean it's subjective because it's only good so long as this group of people think it is, but it's intersubjective because they all agree that it is. Makes sense? So subjective, it's when I think something is good, just me, I have my idea of good connected to some anime. Intersubjective is when a group of people connect this idea of goodness, a common idea of good, with some anime. So it's like it's a subtle distinction, and I think people will mistake intersubjective for objective sometimes. But again, with respect to this common occurrence of underdog trope causing excitement, and we generally think that's a good thing, we can collectively agree that this is good, but only intersubjectively. It's not objective because, again, if we did not value that response, that physical response, or if we did not all agree as a community to say that this is good, it just wouldn't be good. It does not exist in nature itself, apart from us thinking it, apart from us perceiving it, and that's why it's not objective. Does that make sense? I really that is, in my opinion, the ultimate argument against any kind of naturalist account of goodness. Epic of Gilgamesh, Goaty, yeah, has Hero's Journey, yep, absolutely. So I'll reply to your tweet about writing your final essay as me rolling. yeah, my final essay. I don't know if he said something else since, but like my final essay, my final video essay, he said something like that. I'm like, nah, dog, it's just like for school. But anyways, no. The issue is it's committing the is-ought fallacy. Essentially, what you're saying is that because something occurs observably like X amount of times, therefore that is the best thing. But we can't go from something that's purely descriptive, right? So the observance, the objective observance at that of humans having pleasure at the color blue, we can't necessarily go from like a descriptive account of some observable fact to therefore this is objectively good, because they're two different claims. Again, one is purely descriptive, but one's a value judgment. One is asserting like this is existing and it's valuable, and I think it becomes
But
more.
doesn't the trap always be isn't it always
That was such a terrible explanation on my part. Like it's just so abstract, and I think that's why it doesn't convince him, because like it's just not something. I think it's just empty words almost at that point. I feel like I would have benefited from giving a concrete example and maybe actually trying to explain why this is a fallacy. Just saying it's a fallacy has no force unless you can demonstrate how their exact position is fallacious, and I think that's an issue that I unfortunately fell for here. You're like Plat Diamond and Halo. I can't believe you'd spend so much time on a shitty game, bro. Dude, you teach me about all the fallacies so I can dominate my philosophy class next semester? God, there's too many. It's like there's formal ones and informal ones. You know, there's ones pertaining to logical structure, and there's one pertaining to faulty appeals to different things, like fallacious appeal to authority, argument ad populum. You know about those, obviously. But then there's like, I don't remember the names of like the formal ones anymore. But like modus ponens is like if P then Q, P therefore Q, right? But a fallacy would be if P then Q, Q therefore P. I don't remember what it's called though. Ocean Arts was here. Bro was fucking crazy at logic. But yeah, something like that. I'll teach you all the fallacies though. Don't worry.
what is good?
In what
So,
sense?
for example, I can the larger point I was trying to make, just to get more specific. Let's say humans just get this insanely sexual arousal from a perfect 3-act structure, right? Just brings us all to complete and full orgasm every single time we see it. Just knocks our socks off. I'm obviously being hyperbolic here, but that's generally like 3-act structures are how we tell stories. Like it's how we've just decided. If it's
I think his language there actually even highlights how subjective it is. We just decided that it is good, is essentially what he's saying there. I think that's exactly why it's subjective. We're the ones deciding it, and without that, it simply isn't subjective. Or without that, it simply isn't good. That's why it's subjectively good.
popular enough, or if it resonates with enough people.
I think the basic logic ones are the good ones to teach. I actually disagree, because like logically, the fallacy I just explained of if P then Q, Q therefore P, although like logically that's invalid, you can actually fill that with all true claims and still have a good argument. Just an invalid one, but like it's difficult. Yeah, because right, when we argue, we're not normally just arguing logically. It's also about like different entailment relationships. So if I say if P then Q, Q therefore P, although it's not true by virtue of modus ponens, the actual concept of Q might entail as a prerequisite P. So then logically it is different than modus ponens, and so you're not actually committing a fallacy there. It's difficult. I'm not going to get into it. I think, but I will say, like, I think, like, just in terms of wanting to argue and identify fallacies, the formal fallacies don't nearly have as much force as informal ones, because people don't normally pay attention to logical structure, and a lot of times there can be exceptions depending on which premises, or the truth of the premises you load into an argumentative structure. So
Naturally, like with no like manipulation.
because an argument can be invalid, so use, you know, improper logic structures, but still be true. Like your premises and your conclusion can be true despite using an invalid form. And it's, again, like that's why I just don't think that they actually are important. unless you're doing like actual logic. But
And we can even get into the objectivity of manipulation, internal human thing that would make manipulation work. But like we'll save that for later. If you were to take this thing, this reaction that humans have to a thing, and then just give it to them, and you get that reaction back, isn't that process objective? So in the example of
it's like I hate how, and this is why I say once you kind of orient your philosophical system about evaluation, either subjective or objective, it should be subjective, but once you kind of get your philosophical grounding for why it's subjective, these words should never be used again, because you can use objective in correct ways that I think are correct but confusing. So right there, he is correct. Like, the fact that this thing happens in an anime and then it evokes a certain physical reaction, that is objective. Like, it exists. It's an observable phenomena. It's simply out there, regardless of whether you think it or perceive it, right? Like, it is objective, but it is not objectively good. Like, you really need to make sure you put those two things together, always. Wait, Doofy, there is an easy way to break this point. Ask if he knows about evolution, then ask if humans are perfectly optimized, and if they are not, how are they objective with their actions in nature? Maybe I just lack reading comprehension. I'm not entirely clear what you mean there. Ask if he knows about the evolution. Then ask if humans are perfectly optimized, and if they are, and if they're not, how are they objective with their actions in nature? Well, again, like, assuming that he means objectively good, we have another discussion to have. But all he said literally was that, how is this not objective? Well, the actual action in nature is objective, like in the basic sense of existing, whether or not I am looking at it or perceiving it, right? Basic. But is it objectively good? No, because like the quality of goodness does not exist there unless I'm thinking it. So use psychological examples. Okay, interesting.
Of making art or something, or like telling a story. If humans like 3-act structures, just tickles their brains or whatever, right? And your reward is more revenue, more eyes, more whatever.
This is the other thing that I wish I addressed way earlier. This whole assumption about like the author obtaining success and money and reputation as like some end of creating art. I think that's a massive assumption. He like explicitly admits that it's subjective, like he recognizes that it's subjective, yet he continues to use like the language of objectivity about it, which is I think incredibly problematic. But hopefully we'll get a chance to like explore that a little later. Fuck, autocorrect is fucking me. Yeah, as it tends to.
Then doesn't that mean it's objectively good at what it's trying to do? And then, but the problem I think we run into philosophically is when you get into that last bit where you're like, well, this transaction is objectively good. What you're really saying is assuming that you, as the creator or the one doing all of this, giving the stimulus to begin with, your goal was to get this reaction. You want the revenue, money, attention. Then yes, it's good, but there's no objective good to it. But it does, like, despite the results being objective, if that makes sense. Like
yeah. So like he has also like told me like there's just arguments he wish he better explained. I think this one here could use a little like attunement. But again, the gist of it is, assuming the author wants money and success, if using something like the 3-act structure can get that success for them, isn't using that 3-act structure objectively good? And what I try to say in response is that you're using a different form of good. Because good has really two basic meanings. One is like an Aristotelian functional definition. So if you ever read Aristotle, when he says the good of something, he means the end of something, the telos of something. That is like the purpose of a thing. Now, for Aristotle, that's going to be something objective, and I use the classic famous knife example. The good, the end, the purpose, the telos of a knife is to cut. So a good knife is one that fulfills its function, its purpose, its end. Aristotle, bro. Come on, dog. Don't play with me like that. So a good knife is one that fulfills its function, its purpose, its end, its telos. And that's objective. And even if you don't buy into the fact that, you know, the purpose of a knife is to cut, you could even call that subjective. But the fact remains that whether or not the knife does this thing that we say is its purpose is an objective occurrence. The fact that a knife does cut, right, is objective. Regardless of we're thinking it, we're perceiving it, whatever. Sag, I'm not educated. Aristotle, dog. Practically the father of philosophy. I mean, people say that of Plato, but sometimes I feel like it should go to Aristotle. But anyways, so that's he's using a different use of good here, and that's like kind of the trick, I think. Bro, I don't know anything from him. Really? Okay, I think he was the one to put forward the geocentric model of the universe, that the universe went around the sun. I know who he is, that's it. Okay. I think he was also the one to say that the mind is in the heart or something like that. Those are like his famous contributions or something. He's actually an incredibly smart philosopher. And in the history of philosophy, he provides almost every subsequent philosopher with their vocabulary. He's the one who first defined actuality and potentiality, form and matter. So his hylomorphism, the idea that objects are constructed out of a form, so this is the form of a notepad, and matter, so the paper that constructs it. He also has his famous 4 causes, so efficient cause, formal cause, material cause, final cause. So when we say efficient cause today, or when we say cause, I punched this and it caused it to move, that's an efficient cause, and Aristotle's kind of the one to have defined that. Yeah, I mean, he is an incredibly frustrating philosopher to read and understand, but I absolutely am in love with him. It took me a while, though. I used to fucking hate Aristotle, but I think he's my favorite philosopher right now. We'll see, though. I might write my master's thesis on him. But moving on.
Transaction is what it is, but your subjective description of it is what's different every single time. And to that, I think...
I also don't know what he means there, so we're just going to breeze past that. And if anybody wants to explain, or Kreams, if you're still there, if you want to message me afterwards about that. But, yeah.
Is where I'm willing to compromise. It's just, I think at a certain point, you have to cease arguing the philosophy, because the obvious thing is that the vast majority of people that just live in the world want...
I hate this argument. This is the one argument that I wish I also tackled much earlier on that still kind of irritates me a little bit. This idea that, I mean, of course, as a philosopher, the classic charge is that we are talking about things disconnected with reality. But good philosophy, and indeed, I think what I'm doing on my YouTube channel about aesthetic theory is good philosophy. What it does is it simply unveils what people just are doing. And in my opinion, even if people can't provide this explicit articulation of how things are actually working, this is simply what they're doing when they evaluate. And again, I just don't see how it could be any other way. Do not be curious. In my ancient philosophy course that I'm a TA for, our final papers are comparing Plato, Aristotle, and Epicurus on either the soul, epistemology, or metaphysics, essentially. And I'm not gonna lie, Epicurean atomism is kind of wonky. I love it. I like weird ancient mysticism, ancient philosophy. It's just an interesting way to view the world. And I actually quite like Epicurus's ethical theory. This kind of hedonism, but not really. It's quite nice. I don't love him that much, though. He's not as interesting as Aristotle. A little more basic, but I definitely feel just saying that it was the most insulting thing to say to a philosopher. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Maybe that's why it irritates me so much. But because listen, I had to do this short thing on Epicureanism versus Stoicism. Nice. I fucking hate the Stoics. They're such... I mean, okay, whatever. Epictetus, he's okay, I guess. Some of the earlier Stoics are okay. But Marcus Aurelius' Meditations has got to be the most boring work of philosophy I've ever read. I much prefer Epicureans, I think. They just know how to vibe. But yeah, philosophy just is telling us what is going on in the world. And, if you're a moral philosopher, you're trying to say what should be going on in the world. I guess likewise with political philosopher. And that's all I'm doing with my aesthetic theory. I'm just telling you how you evaluate. Not that you should, but like this is literally just how it's done. Like this is like, for instance, the muscles involved in like breathing, for example. Like it's just how it is, whether or not you think it's something else. I'm just saying, like, it's an objective. Here's a crazy thought for you, okay? Here is the crazy thought. Although I am saying that in aesthetic theory, your evaluation is subjective because the values you ascribe to some objective phenomena exist only in your head, likewise with their connection to the objective phenomena, all that is therefore subjective. However, the position itself is objective. I am claiming that this is simply how humans evaluate, and that's that. I think art is subjective, but the critique of it is objective. Sorry if I'm coming in late. I mean, and again, this is why I kind of added addendums to my theory. This is the thing. If we simply agree that at any given time there are a collection of conventions commonly used in artistic criticism, we can then make a very narrow argument that, therefore, whether or not an anime or manga meets those conventions is objective. However, I hesitate to admit that ever, because the moment you allow objectivity into the discourse, and I say this all the time, okay? The moment you allow objectivity into the discourse, the impression people get is that, and this is the simple expression that something just is good or bad. That's normally what people think about by objective. Like 90% of the time, common parlance, I think this is 100% what people mean. And the moment you have people thinking that, discourse is gone. Because, like, why would I talk about Demon Slayer if it just is bad? There's no point. Like, it's either you know that it's bad or you don't. If you don't, then you're delusional. If you know it, you got that fact, move on. Like, there's nothing to, you can't discuss it. It either is or isn't. And you know it or you don't. It's very binary. It's just, it undercuts any possibility of discussion. So while there's a very loose argument to be made about the objectivity of criticism, ultimately, the fact that these are the conventions we are using is subjective. And so in the grandest sense, it's still subjective. And so that's why, like, sure, there's a level of objectivity like buried deep in there, but it's so meaningless that it's not worth talking about. People just like to use the word objective to leverage what they're saying over the people that maintain that it's subjective. Like Sod, the reason he only maintains that it's objective is because he wants to be able to say that he's like the video essayists are better than the AniTubers because they're more professional. They meet these certain standards that he thinks are better than what the filthy AniTubes are doing, with their subjectivity. That's literally it, by the way. 100%. They want to maintain this elitism. They want to say, I'm not doing that filthy, amateur YouTube stuff. I'm doing professional critique. It's objective. That's it. Like, it's an elitist thing. It's so bullshit, and I'm so tired of it. That's why I'm so adamant against the objective thing, because it kills dialogue, because it's either good or bad, and you know it or you don't. That's it. That's a whole conversation. Plus, it gives rise to this whole elitism surrounding, well, I'm doing objective stuff, and you can think you're doing subjective, but I'm better. And that's so fucking stupid. And this is like, when you have these two things in place, that's the death of art. There's no more discussing art. Art becomes it becomes a monolith. Everyone works towards the same exact thing. There's no room for creativity. There's no room to discuss anything outside of what is. And you have a bunch of elitist assholes going around just saying that they're better than, the subjective kids. This is what I'm fighting against. If this is an attractive view to you, then fuck it, go for it. But I fundamentally hate it. And I think that you're part of the problem, and yeah. Now, this is just the logical conclusion of these positions, okay? I don't necessarily think this is what people want, and that's why I try to bring it to its logical extreme. Your crazy thought, Adam. Hello, baby. Okay, I missed a lot, sorry. Me too there. Toxic masculinity personified. I'm crazy thought. Oh no. Sloth in episode debating Doofy. Oh yeah, people jumped the gun. Alright. I believe that critique is also art. I believe that critique is also art, and as defined, art is subjective. Critique is also art. That's an interesting take, Noob. I like that. I like that. It would need to be expanded a little more, but I can see where you're getting at. Doofy do a series on anti-shonen bias where the childish claim is made. Unfortunately, Manga Crash made the seinen bias video, which I think does as good a job as anyone could tackling the seinen elitism, which obviously entails like the bringing down of shonen. And I guess one of my earlier videos are kind of like why shonen isn't a genre. But maybe I could do like a whole video on just that anti-shonen sentiment. It would obviously have a lot of commonality with what Crash already did, but I think I would spin it and focus more on the kind of anti-shonenism, I guess. It's like Doofy is speaking to my soul with these. Absolutely. Sod is stupid, though. Absolutely. Unfortunately, there are a lot of sods out there. Like, as much as we don't want to admit it, I think there's a lot of sods out there that just watch the EFAP crew and Evan Monroe and they walk away with their ideas about objectivity that are deeply problematic, we'll say. Sloth is Pog. Damn it, Crash, why? Yeah, I know. Bro, if you haven't seen it, the seinen bias video by Manga Crash is fucking phenomenal. Like, there isn't a single sentence in there I would have changed or added or removed. Like, he fucking kills the topic. Like, people hating ponies and Totoro because it's like kids' movies is idiotic. Yes, I agree. I agree so much. It's so fucking stupid. Oh my god, people are like fucking awful. I can't obviously, construct the anime community in my ideal way, but what I can do is defeat these shitty dogmas that just lend themselves to such like toxic dialogues. And by eliminating those, you can at least make the landscape a better place. You know what I mean? I'm not fighting for a particular ideal. I'm just fighting like the dog shit things that exist right now. You know what I mean? With that said, I don't know how we got here, but thank you all for your lovely comments. They're very motivating.
Want those things like the money, the influence, the remembrance of the work that you do. So I just kind of, when I say objectively, like on Twitter, or just to say something is objectively good, I'm like, yeah, this thing that we've all mostly decided is the good, satisfies the conditions of the objective transaction, and therefore it's objectively good. If that makes sense.
It does, but I'm actually noticing now a second point of issue. So issue at hand is I think you're conflating two different uses of good. Yeah, so I just explained all that. Skip a little bit ahead to the next argument. I think it's the kind of functional definition.
I feel like we both kind of agree without realizing, because
I don't know if he's right now anymore. Like I think maybe we both agree without realizing it, but I'm already like under the assumption that, again, I think my position on aesthetic theory is objectively right. So I just generally think that everyone simply is in agreement with me on some level, but, and maybe this is sounds like a conceited claim, and I don't care if it does, because I generally think that this is just the truth of the matter. I think my account of subjectivity just is the truth. So I implicitly think everyone just agrees with me in the sense of their actual actions are in accordance with my theory, but the bigger thing is they just don't realize it. And I think that this is perfectly representative of what we actually do. I don't think this is divorced from reality, and I don't think that there's been a better theory put forward that better describes how we actually evaluate things. Josh, agree with that since I love Ponyo. Yeah, I hear that looks like it's for kids or kiddish. It probably sucks from manga more than you think. Yeah, it's so dog shit. There are so many genuinely kid-oriented manga and anime that just are phenomenal. Because you have to understand, anytime somebody creates something for kids, it's under the assumption that their parents are probably going to be there too. And so a lot of these kid-friendly movies, you've all seen it by now, wow, Lion King's more mature than we all thought because it has sex or something in a rock on the background. Those are little Easter eggs put in there for adults. And I think that you can do those with a lot of sophistication, and that there's something worth praising there. So it's like, yeah, sure, its primary audience is for children, but like a lot of this is created under the assumption adults will be watching as well, and so there are things in there for the adults. And I think the way you can balance both can be done with a lot of sophistication, and that's worth like some kind of admiration. You know what I mean? Looks childish, but it isn't really exactly. Same with Osama ranking this season, but it's amazing. Yeah, I did indeed hear that. Watch hours needed update. What are you saying, Mr. E-Bomb? Watch hours needed update. Watch hours always need update, bro. Fuck you mean?
Because what I was trying to say was this: the description of good is the only subjective thing, according to me, right? We just all kind of, I base it off of, does it do what's intended? That's my own personal subjective definition of that.
So like again, right there, he does, admit that what he's saying is all subjective, and he's pretty much like, yeah, I pretty much agree with you through and through. It's just what exactly I define as good is different, and that's fair. But I want to have like an even bigger conversation about about the relevance of the author's success to my personal evaluation of goodness. That's something that he fails to establish, I think, that I still don't quite understand. Bro, it kills me every time someone is like, Ponyo can't be good when it's a wonderful story with so many fantastic elements that connect to this feeling of wonder and joy. It's so enjoyable. Intent is subjective. Sorry, let me go back to that. How much more watch hours do you need for monetization? I think last I checked 187 watch hours, which might seem like a lot, but I think in like a single day I got 20 watch hours or something. I don't remember. But it went down very quickly in like a short period of me checking it, so you have to wait till post stream for the updates of the watch hours. Yes, exactly. So we'll see how it goes after this. I think once this stream, I'm going to do a few more streams during the holiday season. I have still like 3 more videos planned, or maybe it's just 2 at this point. I think when those are all up and said and done, I will have the 4,000 watch hours, and I will have the 1,000 subs. And then, baby, I'll be monetized. And then we're going to be starting 2022 off strong, I think. Do a music stream? I was trying to for a long time. I'm trying to figure out how the fuck I can get OBS going with Reaper, because Reaper has to use a different sound device. Yet OBS uses another sound device. So trying to get like my OBS mic to work alongside with me recording guitars is incredibly difficult, and I haven't been able to figure it out yet. But I do want to do a music stream, like creating music. I think that'd be so fun. 1 second, my parents are like, "Hey Brady, take a look." Oh my goodness. I'm doing a cooking video soon, so let's see how that goes. Nice, man, nice. Everyone rally, get this playlist on, watch TV content. Okay, click on the live stream mute tab, click on loop. Yeah. Oh god. It also gets my watch time up. Though, fun fact, watch time has very little significance with how your video is performing in the algorithm. It's mainly click-through rate that is of significance. So a lot of people are like, don't upload shorts to your channel, it fucks up your watch time, but watch time, yeah, has, I'm pretty sure, no major significance on how your video performs in the algorithm. From everything that I've read from YouTube, from creators, so on and so forth. I'm just gonna take like a 2-minute break. I got a lot of like important emails all of a sudden that I really need to read quickly because this is important. It has to do with my livelihood out here in Ontario. So just give me 1 moment, please. All right. We are back. Let me get the stream up and running. Yeah, so I'm getting some extra funding from my funding source, which is awesome. But because COVID is doing bad, I also need to like do a travel form to like get back into my home province for the Christmas holidays. I also need to do a test, like book a testing for when I get home. It's a lot of bullshit, and this sucks. And I fucking hate COVID, but you know, it is what it is, folks. Let me just catch up with some comments, and we'll get back to the video. All right. I will have you playing on my laptop. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Jess. Shorts do not hurt your algorithm. That is correct. Thank you for confirming, Sloth. I trust your guidance more than a lot of other people. Your growth has been quite impressive, so if anybody knows, it's you. Yeah, no, it's about likes, dislikes, comments, so watch hours doesn't matter. Nice. Sanji Cookbook? Yep, nice. My game pretty, it's gonna be a banger. Nice. Looks me no stay till video, but everything there looks amazing. The boy got that virus. COVID's cringe. First person to hate COVID. You heard it from here, folks. That made me chuckle. All right. Fuck it. Extra money to fuel my alcoholism, I guess. Right, boys? Right. Okay. Let's get back into the video.
However, what I don't like when you ask me is there art that's objectively good, what I hear is, is this art objectively functional in getting the presumed intent, so this is where we get into subjective, of presumably satisfying the creator's urge to get money, fame, wealth, whatever.
So this is an argument that I still don't fully understand, because I think, again, not even being like abstract philosophical here, when somebody says that this is objectively good, they don't mean this was successful and gave the author money and allowed them to fulfill their goal. Like that simply, to me, has zero relevance to how I rank a series. You see what I mean there? Like, for one, yes, function is subjective. So in the ultimate, and that's why he concedes that ultimately he does think it's all subjective, but that his own thing about good is that, you know, it's fulfilling the author's intentions. But like in terms of conversing with other people, because the reason we developed this philosophy in the first place is so we can talk to other people about anime in an effective way. But I just struggle to understand why the success of a manga has anything to do with my evaluation. To me, it's like, essentially what you're conceding there is that the most successful manga is therefore the best, which he explicitly denies. So it's like, well, what exactly do you mean then? He clarifies a little later, but it doesn't make sense to me. Not him fetishizing alcoholism in front of an impressionable chat room. I would never. Again, okay, Adam, thank you very much. What is happening here is you are taking an objective observance, an objective phenomenon, that is Doofy drinking alcohol, and you're trying to make some prescription about it. That is, you're ascribing to me the intention to fetishize alcohol and say that this is an objectively good thing. But I think, as we've already demonstrated, that's nothing more than the is-ought fallacy. So I got one of those for you, and I got another one of those for you. Doofy's a bad role model and wants to turn me into an alcoholic like him. Yes, absolutely, Noob. When you turn 21, if you're not already, I think you actually already are, I don't remember, and I'm sorry for doxing your age if you didn't want that revealed. I'm going to go to America, and I'm going to get you turned the fuck up. Having an alcohol month, Sag. Can't relate, lol. Little fact about me, I went to college for 4 years for art. That thing he just said is not right yet. Nice. Prescription. We drew drugs now too. Nice. Story can carry art. Story can carry art, but art can't carry story. Yeah, that is true. Big brain Doofy. But okay, let me just like rehash what I think the argument is, and if Kream ends up watching this, hopefully he can respond to this. And I think I even give him a little @ in my Discord, but hell no, I'm not close to 21. I'm not close to 21. Dash like the fucking probably like 20-year-old. Bro's acting like he's fucking 20 years younger than 21. Nah. So this is what I think the argument is. Me 18, 19, Sag, I can't believe I'm hanging out with some fucking children. I'm gonna have to fucking like block y'all from my chat, or else I'm gonna have the fucking feds showing up at my door for fucking grooming a bunch of y'all. This is a joke if the feds are watching. We're all friends here. This is a consensual relationship, and they're able to give their legal consent because they're over the age of 16, and I live in Canada. That could have just totally misrepresented the Canadian law, so you know how it is. I don't know anything about law. Anyways, just to recap the argument, as I interpreted it, he's saying that authors want success. This manga brought success, therefore it is objectively good. And I'm like, okay, if you want to go with the functional route, sure, that's fine. Whatever. What the hell does that have to do with me saying that Barakamon is good? What does the author fulfilling their intent have to do with me thinking that Barakamon is artistically admirable and is highly enjoyable to me? I just don't see the relation at all between those two things. Now, if you personally choose to value success as one of your values when you rank an anime, then so be it, but I think that puts you very close to the popularity argument. As we all know, that's argument ad populum, or fallacious appeal to consensus, or majority opinion, and we all know why that's fallacious, why it's wrong, why it holds no water. Art can't carry story, but it can overcome problems in it. If you don't value story, then the art can be more of a makeup for that. If that's what you value, that's true. Lamau, you go for it.
Whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, if the artist
When I inevitably go back through this and like add timestamps, this section will be called "Doofy Gets Cancelled?" Question mark. I think that's funny.
went into making this thing, like for example, Hunter x Hunter, right? If you went into it with the knowledge that Tagashi wanted to make Hunter x Hunter because he wanted to create like a great popular shonen that brought in a lot of revenue, I could say yes, he did so, and ... it was objectively good because the way in which it happened was based on him executing on these ideas and these objective ideas and actions that like tickle that part of your brain that's like, ooh, weed.
Okay, so I was slightly misrepresenting the argument. So this is what he's saying. Number one, the mangaka wants success, defined in terms of like revenue, we might say. Number two, they will commonly use certain tropes, cliches, and archetypes that are popular to achieve that success. Number three, those same archetypes, tropes, cliches evoke a certain physical reaction from us. Number four, we all agree that that reaction is good and that these conventions are good at doing that. Therefore, those conventions are objectively good. I think that's the correct structure of the argument here. But I again, there's a bunch of problems with that. For one, there's the is-ought fallacy in there. For two, you're essentially conceding that whichever conventions are allowed, whatever conventions are used in a successful story are good because they help the author achieve their goal of being successful, which is just a long-winded way, in my opinion. If you guys have other opinions on this, what you're saying is that it's popular, it uses these popular things, therefore the things are objectively good because they fulfill the author's, intention. Again, you're kind of using the functional argument there to make a claim about aesthetic goodness, which is fundamentally different. So it's, again, I think the argument is fundamentally unsound. I question a lot of the premises. The logic seems a little invalid to me. I don't get it. Also, a case can be made for art being story. So if you say that, then what do you mean when separating the comma question mark? My reading literacy is lowering every time I view the chat. But do you see what I mean here? Like, okay, even if there are certain conventions commonly used to evoke a certain reaction from the audience, and the author intended to get that reaction, so therefore the author fulfilled its intention, therefore it's functionally good. Sure. But like, what? But why does the author being able to fulfill their function make the conventions they use objectively good in the value sense? That is my fundamental question. If you just happen to value it because of that, then so be it. But even if we say that, yeah, I'm just, it seems out of touch with how people are actually discussing the matter. Bro, I'm sorry, my tablet's dumb. Yeah, you're good. You're good. Um, how good is it? How good is that when it is when it is was not maybe because of the now, and is not the when if the good does has the not. Oh my goodness, Sloth, you're killing me here, brother. God, my brain turned off for a little bit there. Jeez.
This feels good to me. Little serotonin boost. Like that's just how I.
So I mean, unless Kreams can answer that question, then, which I think his answer would just be, well, I subjectively value it. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. But I just, if that's something you value, and I mean, I'm still an advocate for, you can choose to listen to the community and engage with them or not. That's again something you individually will value. And so I do think it's conceivable to just be an individual ranking anime independent of anybody else. And if this is something you happen to value, then so be it. But I just think it becomes confusing when you then try to take all that and bring it into public discourse where you're dealing with fundamentally different ideas and meanings and definitions. Me thinking I'm having a stroke while listening. Yeah. sorry.
Say it, if that makes sense.
So that makes sense. Like, if you are, it doesn't make sense. I don't know. Functional kind of definition of it requires that you presuppose some kind of end of the activity. So you put that as like the author's intention, which I still think is fine. You say, okay, if his intentions were to, I should have said it this way: if you want to subjectively assume the author's intentions and value that, then sure. But like, unless, yeah. Because in 90% of the time, and I bring this up later, we don't know the author's intentions. And he can say, like, just generally, most mangaka do this because they want to make money. Therefore, we can infer that this mangaka that I'm currently looking at wants to make money. Sure, but, like, again, choosing to value that is itself something subjective, ultimately. Dude, if you imagine a manga chapter without words and only artistic panels, would that not be art telling? Would that not be art telling the story? Absolutely. Like, isn't that the dinosaur manga Gon or whatever have like literally no words? But also, this is like a common phrase in art evaluation or in aesthetic theory, is that like art tells a story, or like even the colloquial phrase, pictures worth 1,000 words. There's a lot of like subtleties that go into like sculpture, for instance, that even though it is a still object in time, the different contours of the body are meant to imply motion. The posture is very carefully thought out to express the kind of psychological disposition of the person that's being sculpted. That from that we can infer like what kind of happened beforehand, especially if it's a sculpture from like an epic or a ballad of some sorts. So again, captured within a still image might be this whole story. That in many cases you could even get just by looking at it. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, absolutely. It's like Gon, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful, amazing manga with some of the best art I've ever seen with no words. Nice. Yep, so art can carry story. I'm not sure most manga want to make money with their art. Some just might have their goal to get art out there, and any money they receive is just a bonus. I agree, and I bring this up later, that for most, I think for a lot of people, like, art is the end in itself. Like, some people just approach art as like a form of expression, like it's almost like a diary for them. It's a way of getting their thoughts out, and that's it. They keep it for themselves. They don't want to market it. Now you might again make the assumption that if you're bringing your art to a publisher to produce, you might therefore be able to reasonably infer that they want to make money. Sure. But again, I think like you said, Baum, like sometimes you just want recognition, and being published is one way to do that. And so the money's an afterthought there. But that's, I guess, also why Kreams also says just like success more generally, and that can be defined in that way or monetarily. It's just like it's kind of like the road I decide to focus on. Happiness is like that too. Since Shuzo Oshimi doesn't use many words. Yeah, I agree. Or even like blame, I think that manga is like pretty low on words, right? Lots of manga have little to no words. Accrue X amount of money. He's clearly accrued that, therefore it's objectively good in the sense that it's performed its function. Like it either performs it or it hasn't. It's clearly performed it, therefore objectively good. I think that's totally like that's sound. My only issue with bringing that kind of language into the domain of evaluation is that, I mean, I don't know if you're only just realizing, but you, like you said, we very much do agree. But I think when you say objective goodness at all in that kind of sphere of evaluation, I already talked about this, the problem with objectivity and why I'm like having this fight. Then we get into this really messy discussion of can you misunderstand art, and I think this is something I also want to pay a bit of attention to. Sloth, this is why these absolute claims are difficult, since there is a gray area. If art is storytelling method, then distinctions can be redundant. Yeah, there's actually a lot of philosophers that just reject that we can actually make any absolute claims. Now, a lot of people will say in response to that, well, isn't that an absolute claim? And I mean, in one sense, sure, but I think you can break down that claim logically to like not actually be an absolute. Like I think it maybe be conditional. I'm not sure the rationale now, but like I think a lot of people just accept you can't actually have any kind of absolute claim, and it's always like every time you make something seemingly absolute, it's always coming with like the little, asterisks, making it conditional. Like it's usually a generalization, but you can't predispose that money or even success is the sole intent in any case. In all cases, there are a variety of intents mixing together. I 100% agree. Even adding on to that, let's see. I mean, I feel like it's a reasonable thing to infer, but again, my ultimate issue is just like, what is the relevance of that to my evaluation of some anime or manga or art piece generally? I claim Doofy needs to get some bitches. Tell me that ain't absolute. Amen. Shit like that gets me going, dog. But if we're all like, I think so far we were able to question, the naturalistic fallacy that we've kind of had earlier with the Izot stuff. We also had a good chat about the value of the intentions of the author. Let's look at if you could misunderstand art, and here we're getting into like the kind of death of the author stuff. We briefly discussed this last stream, so if you're interested in that, go back there. I also have a video called How to Interpret Art, Fuck the Author. It's based off like a paper by Roland Barthes called The Death of the Author. It's a famous literary movement, I guess, in the 20th century, and I believe that for a lot of people it's still like the kind of mainstream mode of interpretation. I think people just like to consider the author because that can provide more insights into the story, and that is valuable, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that we should take that as like the absolute baseline for interpretation. But let's talk about it. What do we have to say in this video about it?
Obviously, when it comes to like stepping out of this debate for a second, right? Excuse me, I have to burp. Just cut that part out. If you were to step outside the realm of philosophy for a second, right, and outside of the purview of this debate,
just gotta pause to shake my head at that one.
What you end up having to do is just living in the world, right?
Damn. My shit do be in the world, dog. Come on now, y'all.
Assuming you're a YouTuber, that's what you have to keep in mind. You have to be able to understand the thing that you're criticizing, or have a baseline linguistic powers to explain why maybe you didn't like it or something, right? So it still requires you to have an evaluation of art. Now, what I think,
you're right, noob. I'm not.
What I think the trap is not understanding, because I think we're focusing too bad or objective of.
Let's get to the meme.
Blue.
That's Golden Lamp by My Dead Friends. Go stream it. We're at 158 monthly listeners. We want to get that shit to 200 before the end of the year. It would mean a lot to us. Thank you all in advance. Link in description. But this is the meme in question here. Like what the author meant, what the teacher thinks the author meant. For instance, the curtains are blue. What your teacher thinks the curtains represent the immense depression and his lack of will to carry on. the author meant the curtains were fucking blue. Okay, this is like a classic meme we've all seen, expressed in different ways, but this is the basic idea.
Okay, so there's two like schools of thought, like as far as I've observed, when it comes to people like doing this. There are people who see the meme, find it funny, and move along. They just like, yeah, it's like a thing English teachers be doing. But then there are people who are like, this is it. This is everything I've been searching for. This is the answer. They're like, well, like, yeah. Why do we need symbolism and themes anyway?
I'm gonna get back to your point a little later, Josh, because that's such a important claim that I'm hoping to hash out in a video one day. But I don't want to detract for now.
Like, why can't a curtain just be blue, right? Like,
but essentially, the two camps he's describing are like those people that are like, okay, you can read more into it, assuming that reading more into it means going beyond what the author intended, and like that's fine. Or there's the whole camp that thinks that like that kind of practice is stupid, like, and that kind of symbolism is like it's too much, it's extra, it's unnecessary.
Get people like that. And then with those people, I've noticed that when they go to try to evaluate art, they come at it from this super like hyper literal perspective where they just fundamentally misunderstand it, right? Like they're so wrong about their perception of the work. It borders on them, like they might as well have not watched it. You know what I mean? Like if I was to show somebody, like the Squid Game discourse, right? If you were to literally, like, if you don't know how to evaluate art or think critically, and you watch Squid Game and you came out thinking it was against communism or something, you're an idiot. Like, you're just wrong.
So I'll probably stop there, and like I'll just start explaining some of the ideas here. I think I grasped this argument pretty well, and this is like a axiomatic. You know, this is like a basic distinct like difference between the two of us. Just our stance on the role of the author and interpretation. It's like, again, it's an axiom. It's the most basic premise that you either accept or you don't. We just disagree, and that's that. But let me just try to explain the two sides of the argument and discuss like my side of things, I guess, and why I'm convinced of my side. So the idea is that Squid Game, according to the creator of Squid Game, is fundamentally a criticism of capitalism. So given that, what Kreams is saying is that anybody who walks away with the interpretation that that Squid Game is actually a critique of communism is objectively wrong. So essentially what they're saying is there simply is a kind of intention behind a work, and to have an interpretation that differs from that baseline intention in any significant way is just wrong. It's outside the scope of meaningful interpretations, and we ought to reject it. So if you come away with a super literal interpretation of Squid Game and somehow come to the conclusion that it is about anti-cap or communism, you're objectively wrong, and we should just think you're an idiot, and you're banished from the realm of discourse regarding Squid Game. This presupposes that the author's intention is the kind of baseline for a good interpretation, and I just reject that. And this is my counter. And my classic example is Hideki Anno, because Hideki Anno, on many occasions, has just gone out of his way to say that the religious symbolism in Eva was there because it looks cool, and he didn't put any substantial thought into why he used what he used. It just looked cool. So that would automatically then disqualify any religious interpretations of Eva. If you have an interpretation of Eva that it depicts some kind of religious theme, you are fundamentally, objectively wrong about Neon Genesis Evangelion. My counter to that is that some of the most profound, well justified, with lots of textual support, some of the best interpretations of Eva say precisely that there is a religious message there, and they have some of the most amazing and just like breathtaking arguments as to why this is the case. Like, they have good textual support, they have great justification in support of their conclusions, but what this position entails is that this is utter nonsense because it's just not what the story is about. To me, I am against that. I think if you can bring that much textual support to your argument, regardless of what the author says, I think your argument your interpretation should be in the sphere of what we can discuss and what is even in the sphere of a good interpretation. The word Evangelion has religious, yeah, exactly. So what the, and guess what? So like, yeah, every single word in Neon, New, Genesis, right, Origin, the first book of the Bible, Evangelion, right, Evangelicals, every single word in that's obviously religious. But like, again, the existence of some image of religious depiction, like you can use those symbols without putting any meaning into them. So like Ano famously does not put any meaning into those, yet a lot of people do, and they come, they're very significant. Sorry, Nars just messaged me, and I'm just like, damn, I really want to read that. Narj, if you're here, I want to reply to you, because that's pretty crazy, and I wish I could see, but I do not have him on Snap. Holy fuck. But let's just read what New has to say real quick. I do hate the teacher's interpretation sometimes. I've seen too many educators that simply take their interpretation of a work from SparkNotes and reiterate it without working to believing it. I mean, that's fine. Did I accidentally pause the stream? No, I didn't. I was just looking down at that moment. Like, yeah, sure. Like, we can have problems with like how teachers interpret stuff. Like, that's fine. But the fundamental principle being expressed there is that. Sorry, I'm just thinking about Narish's message. I'm so easily distracted. Fundamentally, what the teacher position represents is producing an interpretation that is dramatically distinct from what the author meant. My example with Ava is that Ano has zero significance to the religious imagery. There are interpretations that have 100% significance of the religious imagery. But if you think that the author provides the baseline for interpretations, you therefore commit yourself to the position that this super well justified religious interpretation is nonsense because it's so against what the author meant. And so later Kreams will say, like, one of his goals is to just produce a work. And, you know, the example he gives, like, perhaps this work is meant to be like a critique of capitalism. And he's like, my biggest fear is that people will come away from that work thinking it's pro-capitalism and like it's sending down like the alt-right pipeline or something like that. I'm like, okay, fair enough. But let me put it to you this way. Although you consciously put all this work into expressing a anti-capitalist message, consciously, this is what you're choosing to do, we have to understand that most of our actions, most of what we say, think, do, are much more influenced by the things we are not thinking about. That sounds like a moot point, but this is super important. There are just certain habits, certain values, and certain standard interpretations that we possess on the basis of the systems and structures we find ourselves embedded within. So, for instance, although you might write an explicit criticism of capitalism, you might say that every character in this work explicitly says at least once in the chapter, per chapter we'll even say, you know, fuck capitalism. The fact still remains that you yourself, as somebody in a capitalist society, God, that's such a corny phrase, but here it is, by virtue of you existing in a capitalist society, you are so embedded in just the normal behaviors that accompany it. You are conditioned by this on so many levels, way beyond what you're aware of. Some of our most basic habits and attitudes towards like wealth and like materialistic objects, our basic attitudes and cravings towards different objects are so fundamentally conditioned by the fact that this is a capitalist country that we're not even aware of it. So although you are explicitly saying like this is what's wrong with capitalism in your work, you might actually be implicitly bringing in assumptions that are only true under capitalism into your work. And you just don't know it. You don't intend to, but just because you are a capitalist person, whether or not you think you are or not, you simply live in a capitalist country, therefore you have these kind of basic attitudes about capitalism that you're unaware of. And these might just find their way into your work. And so a reader who is very much, you know, separate from your intentions, who is separate from your own culture, they might be able to look at your work now and see that despite what you actually think as the author, there is a lot more in that work that is pro-capitalist that you just don't realize because you're so embedded into a capitalist structure. And so this person might come up with the most well thought out, well justified, with a lot of textual support interpretation of how your work is pro-capital despite what you think. Now, to you, they are objectively wrong. They're misinterpreting the work. They're misunderstanding it. And that it's ultimately a nonsense interpretation. But I think that's just foolish, because I don't think that we are ever in control of 100% of what work we put into something. And like when you see an interpretation so rich and well justified, just to say like you're wrong, moving on, to me, I reject that. I just don't agree with that. The point I made was that this is an extreme representation of leftist view of capitalism. The dichotomy between this fantasy and reality shows of how out of touch they are, therefore pro-capital. Interesting, actually, interesting. I think I agree with you. Yeah, exactly. This very assumption, this kind of dichotomy between like capitalism and like communism or whatever, is itself a product of capitalism. So the fact that even if you're critiquing it, you're already working under the assumption, like the capitalist assumption. And I think by even having that in your work itself, that might even deliver a pro-capitalist message. And there's a lot more like richer ways to go about like saying this, like how capitalist structures influence our most ordinary attitudes and beliefs or whatever. There's a whole political literature on it. There's just a whole literature on it in general. I'm not familiar with it, and so I'm not comfortable talking anymore on it. But this is just one way to show how like, even if you're explicitly anti-capitalist, you might be so capitalist from the country you live in that it makes its way into its work, and there are good interpretations to say that your work inadvertently is pro-capital. There's a lot of things like feminists too. Like there are a lot of works that are explicitly feminist. Writers might be like, I wrote this work to dissolve the differences between genders and gender roles, and to have equality across genders, blah blah blah. This was my explicit intent. However, a lot of the things that you're like tackling in your work are only reinforcing different anti-feminist messages. So for instance, like a big thing about feminism is dissolving like gendered stereotypes that like men should do this, women should do that, right? And so in your work you're saying that I'm against this, but I'm just trying to figure out the best way to articulate this. Maybe you might say, like, maybe we need to have more women doing men's jobs, and that would kind of create equality. But in saying that, you're reinforcing the stereotype that there are men jobs and women jobs. So even though you're trying to make equality across the genders, right? This is your explicit feminist message. You're actually reinforcing non-feminism, right? You're reinforcing certain gender roles, which is very anti-feminist. So again, that's just another example of how you might think you're doing one thing, but you actually are not doing it. And there's good arguments to suggest that. So this is just the different ways that I try to undermine the intentions of the author, because most of the time they are not in control of 100% of what goes into that work. And that's my basis, and I think Roland Barthes' basis as well, for saying that the author just don't matter. At New Britain, back in my high school days, I would always go out of my way to argue with the teacher's interpretation when writing. Really? It's pretty pogged. I would do nothing but regurgitate what they said because I was that kid. I did push teachers as well to know if they were being unthinking sheep, or to at least evaluate yourself and believe the interpretation of yourself. Okay. I cannot relate. I was very much kiss ass. I wanted to get the fucking highest grade, and the easiest way to do that in high school is to just repeat what they're saying. Booyah, baby. High school encourages non-critical thinking. I'm going to say it. That's it. I'm critical of the high school system. How many viewers are we at? We still have 5. That's awesome. How long have we been going? Almost 2 hours. Let's keep going.
Right, because that just wasn't what it was. It was a critique.
Again, you're just assuming that there is an intention to the work and we should maintain that. I think everything I just said is a sufficient argument for questioning the authority of the author. Oh, damn, it definitely did not. Yeah, I could. Oh, jeez, I could see that.
Of capitalism, right? Like that's what it was. It's not my interpretation. That's just what it was.
But unfortunately, it is your interpretation. Back now was what I said base. I don't remember what you said. I'm not gonna lie to you. Oh yes, yeah. What you said was based. I gave another example that I could express more confidently, but like you might write a work that's like feminist in nature because you're trying to create equality between the two genders, but in doing so your method might be, well, we need more women and men jobs, right? And that will kind of like create the balance that we need. However, the problem with that is that a fundamental tenet of feminism is that we need to dissolve gender roles. So, for instance, the fact that there are men jobs and women jobs is a non-feminist assumption that it's actually trying to combat. And so even though your ultimate goal is feminist in that you want to kind of create this equality between the genders, in doing so you're reinforcing non-feminist ideals such as the idea of gender roles. Yeah, I think that's probably my clearest way to demonstrate how you can have a certain explicit intention but inadvertently support the opposite message. And it's on that basis that we can question the authority of the author on these matters. I'm stealing that? Yeah. It's so good, right? Honestly, I took a woman in science course this semester, begrudgingly, because there wasn't anything else that I enjoyed. Like, I don't love science, and I don't know like anything about feminism. But like that is probably the class I learned the most in. This is where I wrote like my fucking 10, 12 page paper on the illusion of objectivity in science. And I read like a lot of really insightful feminist thinkers that like feminism just gets a bad rap because of like the media presence and depiction in media and like the kind of lay people version of feminism. But like academic feminism is based, like feminism in science is based AF. I mean, that's as much as I can speak on because that's all I really read. But like Donna Haraway and Sandra Harding, like these, bro, they're based AF. My first year English prof literally was so dope. Who was it? I'm stealing that, reactionaries. Yeah. But anyways, I don't, you know how it is, boys. I would disagree with that.
No,
I'm just gonna skip past this. Actually, let's just hear what Kreams has to say.
like if that's literally like the author, if the author like made it like that, said it was like that, and you obviously like if you see it like that, right? Like it's there. Like what I'm trying to say is that at some point you have to stop. You have to put your foot down and say, okay, some of these interpretations are just flat out incorrect.
See, again, this is all stemming from the assumption that the author's intention is what's authoritative on the matter. I think we've already dispelled that. However, I think I replied to Snow's comment about this. But I think the fundamental concern motivating this line of reasoning is that there are, right, when we're living in the world, to use Kreams' phrase here, when we're living in the world, there just are fucking shitty interpretations. Like, you read Jujutsu Kaisen, no, fuck, let's try and do something super, super simple. It's like, I took some notes, okay, before I did the stream, just to like make sure I nailed the Aesop fallacy. And it says explicitly, Brady drinks 5 times a week, therefore he should, right? That was my example against the naturalistic kind of fallacy. If I come out with the interpretation that this is trying to say that we should all reject traditional values and embrace a kind of progressive leftist agenda, it's like, that is a shitty interpretation because there's nothing on this piece of paper that would suggest anything remotely close to that. You have to import so much on your own. You have to make so many leaps, jumps, and bounds. It's like ridiculous. And anybody who heard you say that would criticize and ridicule you, right? Because it's stupid. But I think the issue there isn't so much that you are going against what I intended when I wrote that. It's that you have no textual support for your interpretation. So ultimately, the issue isn't about whether or not you agree with the author. It's about how well you can justify your position. So it's about the sufficiency of your support for your conclusions, right? That's the ultimate concern here. So yes, there just are bad interpretations, but they're not bad because they go against the author. They're bad because they lack support. Any kind of support. Your support could include the author. I'm not saying that they're invaluable or that they're non-valuable, but what I am saying is that you need something. And if you don't have some kind of support, that is what we call a bad interpretation. Just like my example there. However, you can have interpretations that are counter to the authors, that are well supported, that I think are good. And I think a lot of people would intuitively agree that you can have a good interpretation that goes against that of the authors. And I think, taken together, these are reasons as to why we should reject that the author's interpretation has the last say in things, and that ultimately the issue here is how much support you have for your interpretation, not whether or not it conforms to the authors. I rest my case. I don't think that... Yeah. If you just disagree, if you just value the author, then so be it. I'd like to hear some more arguments in favor of why the author's like authoritative. Some people say it's because it's their work, you know, duh, who are you to question that? Like if you remember in our last video, that's what one of the guys said about Bleach. Ted Kubo just wanted Bleach to be simple. And I'm like, no, he didn't. And he's like, oh. I'm like, well, actually what I say is, it doesn't matter what Ted Kubo fucking said. I'm finding depth in it. Like, what do you not understand? And he's like, whoa. I'm like, the author, like, why should the author's interpretation matter? And he's like, because they wrote it. Duh. And I'm like, oh, bro, come on. Like, that's not an argument. But if like, Kreams could provide some argument in favor of holding the author in that authoritative position, I'd be willing to hear that out, and I'd be willing to, like, engage with that a little more. But I think as it stands, I've given enough reasons to reject that, and I hope my position is now a little more intelligible. What did I miss? The whole course was about children's literature. Oh, dude, children's lit is so good. I forgot who she was. She was like super young though. Kind of a baddie. Damn. Bro, you're still alive? You know how we do it. Doofy, many poets and rappers will say something that sounds nice or cool, and when someone will later interpret something from it, then there can be a new view on it. Yeah, absolutely. Like back when I used to like write hip hop and be more into that kind of scene, me and my friends had this kind of phrase. It's called like the sweatshirt treatment, because like Earl Sweatshirt would have some phenomenal lyrics, but if you go on like Rap Genius, the annotations on the lyrics were like way outside the scope of what we're fairly confident Earl Sweatshirt meant. And so we're like, it's the Earl Sweatshirt fans that just like blow up every single line to make it the most like intelligent thing imaginable, regardless of what Earl himself said or meant rather. And so we called it the sweatshirt treatment. And I think back then maybe we meant it like in a bad way, like that's not what Earl meant. It's bad. It's, you know, besides the point. I can't be confident if that's what we meant. I might be like misremembering, but like that's totally legitimate. I think that's totally fine. Like I don't see any issue with that. Again, if entertainment is about, I mean, if art's about entertainment at some level, and that's where you find your entertainment in like producing these really profound interpretations regardless of the author, I mean, fuck, I think you're justified in doing so. And people will have a hard time with Salvador Dali with that position, he said. Everyone feels something different, and that does not make them wrong or incorrect. Yeah, I agree. Bro, there's a lyric in a Panucci's Pizza song that literally outs him as a sketchy guy. But before the allegations came out, it sounded cool and insightful. Absolutely. Yes. A 1,000,001%. Yes, exactly. So, I think that thoroughly covers the death of the author, can you misunderstand art kind of stance. Let's skip ahead and just see what else we get into in this video that I might want to correct. Yeah. I think the one thing I want to go back to really quickly is that, like, you said that the author's intentions shouldn't be ignored, but like practically, I think that's normally how it goes. Like, I think I can list facts about like 3 mangaka out of like the fucking 200 I've read. You know what I mean? Like we just, our default mode when we go into something is to just consume it as it is, as it exists out there in the public space. Sure, it's colored by like what we know about it and like what we know of others' thoughts about it, but like that often is completely independent of a creator's thoughts. Like, yeah, I think that's a really good point. Good job, Doofy. For one, like, yeah, practically speaking, like if we want to talk about philosophy being divorced from reality, I think actually Kreams' position is like falls into that more than my own position. What I'm saying here, I think, is very much reflective of what the average person does when they read a manga. Like, you don't know almost anything about the manga 90% of the time. There's obviously exceptions, but like by and large, like Adam, what do you know about like the fucking mangaka of like Jujutsu Kaisen or the mangaka of like Tokyo Revengers? Nothing. Like that's not how you approach it. That's not how most people approach art. What does anybody in here know about anything that they read or watch? No, we obviously, like, some of us who are super into anime and manga, or some of us who are just more keen on like the details and relations between like a time period and a work and the author. Like, of course, you're gonna pick up on, you know, the author and like try and figure out commonalities across the blah 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 blah. Who cares? Those are the weirdos. Those are the exception, not the rule. 90% of my interpretation is complete without knowledge of the author's thought process. Exactly. And that's most people's interpretations and evaluations. Yeah, I'm not going to read that message out loud, Bomb, but yeah. Yeah. Fucking Panucci's Pizza, man. I don't know what the fuck D. Greyman's mangaka is thinking about when she writes. If you know how much anime I've seen, I know next to nothing about staff and only a little about directors and VAs. Exactly, right? Like, even with manga, I've probably read about 200 manga now. I think there are 6 mangaka I can confidently say I know about. And that's it. Like, out of 200 titles, right? So it's just not how people actually work. Again, I just think that's more evidence as to why the author's intentions just don't really matter. I really think I've given a rock solid case here for that. Again, I do think it's axiomatic. If you just disagree with my premise, that's simply it. Like, you can either think that the author is important or not. But I'm just not convinced. Like, I think my arguments are strong enough to justify my own position. So my girlfriend's texting me. She's like, I'm going to be off actually an hour later. I also need to charge her laptop very quickly. But reminisce on what I've just said. I'll be back in 10 seconds. I just gotta charge her laptop. Why won't Noob tell us a story? Why won't Noob tell us a story? Yeah, it's a new single coming off the next album, Straight from Days. Go stream A Demon for the Weekend now, out everywhere. Whew, we're back. What did I miss? Dude, if you know nothing about them personally, only about Discog, well, like, yeah, that's true. Like, I don't know their intentions per se, but I at least know some of their insights into why they did certain things, and some of their intentions they explicitly state regarding their stories. But the common person doesn't even know that, and what little knowledge I know is quite narrow. So good point. Noob tell a story, no, sad, very sad. Moving forward, right? So this, I don't even know her name, right? Like, and that's just like the way we generally consume stuff.
So I think like that just the personal, like I said, the way I consume art is just going to be different, right? So I
disagree. I think everyone consumes art the exact same way, but that's a topic for another video. Essentially, I think that there's like a twofold process that goes on when we consume any media. There's the there's the unreflective, immediate experience. So this occurs like on the physiological level. It's literally frames are going by on the screen. The light from those frames are hitting our eyes. Wait, really? What? So like frames are moving on the screen. The light from those hit my eye, hit the back of my reticle, blah, blah, blah. My brain processes it, makes a physical image about it. Simultaneously, I am reacting to it emotionally. And this is pre-reflective. I'm not thinking critically about this. It's simply happening in real time. You could almost say I'm being physically determined by what's appearing on the screen. Like, we don't think to get emotional about a scene. We simply see something happening and it just sparks an emotional response. Like, it's not, we don't think then we cry. You know what I mean? It's just like we receive the information and we cry. This is pre-reflective. There's nothing critical about this. This is like the level of enjoyment. So when people say I enjoyed something, this is like the level they're talking about. Then there's the reflective level. And this can happen while you're receiving the anime. It'll happen always logically after this emotional level. And it can also happen like after you've watched the show and you're processing it. But it's always after the emotional processing. And this is when you think about it. And this is when you, both consciously and unconsciously, take what you've seen and run it through your criteria of goodness. Now, we don't have an explicit articulation of that all the time. We just kind of have it in our minds, and sometimes it happens unconsciously. But this is still a distinct process from your pre-reflective enjoyment of a show, I guess. But this is essentially this reflective stage when you're taking what you've just seen and you're running it through your different criteria, both consciously and unconsciously. And like, depending on how well it meets your criteria, you will come out with the judgment that it is good or bad. And by a judgment of good or bad, all I mean to say is that you've taken this objective phenomena, the anime, you take your subjective idea of what is good, and you make the connection. So when you say Naruto is good, you're just saying that this objective anime meets all my criteria for being good. Therefore, I take my subjective idea of goodness and I make the connection between it and the anime. That's it. That's it. And I think this is simply how we process anime. This is how we experience art. And I think this is objective. I think this is universal and necessary. I think this is how we've always done it. I think this is the only way we can do it. Just like by virtue of how we are constructed biologically. So I think we all just process anime the same in that broad sense. Now, obviously, whether or not I cry at the ending of Your Lie in April is contingent on me, my own temperament, certain beliefs and attitudes I have, and that'll vary person to person. But generally, like, the process is the same. I wasn't broad enough when you said that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the consideration and the deduction is different, but yes, there are two general processes. Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to your earlier point. That this immediate pre-reflective emotional processing of the show that happens simultaneously with your actual experience of the show, this is even pre-linguistic, because language is kind of an abstract thing. Language is like one step removed from reality. So language will never adequately capture that emotional process. And that's why we say that, like in the most basic sense, we always are willing to say that how we feel emotionally towards an anime is subjective, because it is a very particular experience for me that might not be shared by everyone. That's, I think, what most people are willing to concede. But then people try to go in to say like this second process, this reflective process. They try to say that's objective. It's not. I've already explained that, I think, enough. But essentially, this occurs much more often than not, at least, through the kind of medium of language, which is already a step removed from just immediate sense experience. But maybe this is too complicated of an argument for me to get into here, but this is this is some good shit that I have been planning to make a video on forever, since the summer, and I just haven't. Likewise with the Berserk Fairy Tail video. Keeps getting delayed. Sorry about that, folks. It'll come around eventually.
My worldview around that, because I'm just a person, right? But I think even the point that I was trying to make, I'll spare everybody the experience of having to go through the rest of this podcast. I like speed. Come on, hit me with that watch time. Anyway, so the point that I was trying to make is art is not like a thing found in nature. It's for humans by humans. Like, that's what it is.
That's an argument he made in the podcast also that I don't understand. Like, the fact that we make art doesn't make our evaluation of it objective. I just don't get it.
Like, objectively. Because what are you gonna do? Draw, paint?
Like, yeah, sure, we make art ourselves and we make it for other humans, but like, so is language. You know what I mean?
Thing for an armadillo and expect a review. Like there's a certain there's a certain level of baseline. Like I said, there's a certain level of baseline understanding that we all have to operate under. And when people say some shit like, "Well," I'm trying to think of something really common.
Exactly,
People
Josh.
like
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, I know. When somebody's like, "I really like trash TV," right?
Okay.
There's you could feel the objectivity in their subjectivity.
That doesn't make sense to me.
They say it's trash because by like the conventions that like are commonly ascribed to it based off of art being made for humans by humans, that it's like genuinely held under the same, like we all operate under the same like frameworks basically.
If I were to put this argument into doofy language as I do, sounds incoherent to you. If I try to interpret it in doofy language afterwards, but what he's trying to get at is this weird phenomena where we say something is bad, yet we enjoy it, and thereby think it's good simultaneously. So like we think something's good and bad at the same time. It's essentially like the weird tension he's trying to like explain away. I think it's much more easily to explain in this way, and I think this is what he's getting at also. But the idea is we have these intersubjective conventions. Let me rephrase that. As a community of people that watch television and that criticize and interpret television and evaluate television, there are certain marks of what is generally considered a good TV show. This is what I mean by intersubjective conventions. The things in most shows that are generally considered good, those are intersubjective conventions. We can recognize that something we're watching does not meet those conventions, but simultaneously, we individually, regardless of any what people generally think is good, we can still enjoy it. That's the idea of trash TV. It's enjoyable, but it's perhaps not conventionally good. I think that makes perfect sense. You can think that something doesn't have the merits of something conventionally good, yet still enjoy it, because you're just using two different sets of criteria there to make two different judgments. So one set of criteria are like the community's idea of goodness. It doesn't meet all these, therefore it's not good. But then I have my own personal criteria of goodness as it relates to my enjoyment. It meets this, therefore it is good. So that's the reason this isn't an actual problem, is because there's two different sets of criteria that yield two different judgments at two different levels. Again, the enjoyment argument is always that immediate individual experience, and this other one is this kind of reflective thing that, again, two different processes, two different sets of criteria, two different judgments. There's actually no problem here. So the idea of trash TV makes sense because of what I've just said. I think that's what Kreams is also getting at.
More or less. Again, unless there's some like extenuating circumstances, like you're deaf or you're blind or there's like something really traumatic like that, right?
So he'll also frequently say we operate under the same framework, and I think what he's referring to here is the idea that we as a community have like a shared set of criteria we value, and he holds on to that like pretty firmly, and he thinks that unless you have like something like that physically would prevent you from appreciating something, like if you're deaf you can't have an idea of like good sound, I guess, perhaps, and sure, but I think he assumes that all humans operate under the same framework. I think that I question that. I'm much more Wittgensteinian on the issue, the idea that there are different communities, different language games that we have, and that there's no universal definition of good. Rather, good is always particular to some community that's using it. Do we have a different set of criteria? We have a trillion sets of criteria. I think we have like 1,000,001 set of criteria, because I think the way that people use good in the battle shonen community in the West is one way. I think the way that people use good in like the K-drama community in Korea is using good slightly differently. I think that the people that watch like Western movies from the 50s have a different idea of good. I don't think that these are all radically distinct. I don't think that these are all completely foreign to each other. I think the very fact we use the same word in a similar situation is reflective of the fact that there is some commonality amongst all of them, but I don't think that, for one, we can get a universal definition of good, and for two, mainly because I don't think that it would fit perfectly every single definition. So yeah, he maintains that there's this universal framework that we're all using, and I just disagree. I think the community idea of good that yields these different ideas of goodness, subjective conventions, are particular to certain communities, and there's no one universal, one size fits all. There never has been. Yeah, this is Wittgenstein's idea of language games, and good are different uses of the word good all have a family resemblance. So even if we can't say exactly why they're all similar, there is something similar there. If at bare minimum it's the usage, the regular usage of the term in those situations. Difficult argument. Your criteria is just as legitimate as mine and Doofy's. Yeah, exactly. Individually, we all might value different things. But for the sake of conversation, even though me, Toast, Snow, and Noob all have different taste, and to an extent, different things we value as good, and then by farther extension, different criteria, it's not like we all have radically distinct different ideas of goodness. They're fairly comparable. And I think that expresses itself in the fact that even when Noob gives something like Ava a 3, given his criteria, I can at least make sense of it. And these are criteria I also use, but interpret slightly differently. So again, the most specific and full articulation of any one person's criteria is going to differ from the person next to them, but there's going to be enough similarities that like conversation's possible. Because if you literally just use good in a completely different way, we couldn't talk. Like it would be like boats passing each other in the night. Like there should be nothing there. I hope that makes sense.
So when somebody's like, I like trash TV, it's such a bizarre comment because you don't.
Anyways, I've explained the trash TV kind of comment there. Does success matter in evaluation? This is another important part.
Because the proposition is, if you don't work under the assumption that making money or whatever is the good thing, like if other musicians don't decide, hey, that's also what I want, or that's etc. That first thing is probably the truest thing if you think about it, because
yeah, again, we've already talked about this. I've asked him in the conversation to try and express why the author's intentions matter. I don't get a satisfactory answer. Maybe I didn't ask the question right, but this is still an issue, I think. Then we get, is it too theoretical? We've already discussed that. Does popularity matter in evaluation? This is a strange argument that I kind of want to just briefly touch on before ending the stream. I'll go like another 15-20 minutes, I think.
With the word objective, when I use it to describe art I like or something, I go into it assuming, it's purely my assumption, but I go into it assuming that we all understand the current framework that we A, are living under, and B, that we consume art under, right? So when I say something is objectively good, I take the person on the receiving end to understand it as by all.
The fact that we can have the discussion of and ask the questions, what is good about this, is very interesting. Given if everything in goodness was objective, we wouldn't need to ask or discuss this. I see what you're saying, but I think that at minimum with the objective model, you would still have questions about whether or not this actually fits the idea of goodness, or questions about whether somebody understands the idea of goodness. Someone could just simply say it's good and we would understand. Yeah, like in the utopia of the objectivist, we would all know what is good. We would all understand goodness and we'd be able to identify it, and like that would be it. Like yeah, that's a good point. In that objectivist utopia, then there would be no need to have discussions. Like we would all just know that it's good, and then we would move on. So again, just another reason why the objective model is fucking lame. Eugenics was supported by the scientific community from the late 1800s all the way up to the 20s. Yeah, absolutely. And we know what Germany did with that. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All the measurements and popular consensus we've arrived at this point, up until this thing was created, and up until like when you in your life, in your existence, in your timeline, fuck you, was we're absorbing it, it meets these measurements, therefore it's objectively good. But obviously, I don't want to say the entire thing I just said every single time, so I just use the word objectively because.
And I don't think, like, again, this is maybe my. Let me just hear his point first. I don't want to cut him off in case he's saying something important to follow this up.
And here's the sentence: it might as well be.
Yeah, this whole idea of as if. Class is over. Nice. Okay. Let me put it to you this way. I actually kind of agree with him here. I think that for a lot of us, when we use these intersubjective conventions, I hope I've sufficiently explained that by now. When we use these intersubjective conventions, we just take, like, we just accept them. That, we just say, like, okay, this is the framework we're all working under. If we just accept those as, maybe we don't have to go as far as to say, like, those are the truth, but we can say, like, those just are what people are using. Be realist about how people evaluate things, that there is this kind of commonality amongst critics. We do proceed, if we accept that framework, as if it was objective. But as, we're using as to invoke a similarity, but not an identity. So we're saying it's like it's objective, but it is not objective. So I think that he's right in this particular circumstance, that it's as if we proceed practically as if it is objective, and that's fine. But my bigger issue here is just like, we should just understand that the whole enterprise of aesthetic evaluation is subjective. Make that orientation, understand what it means, understand how it manifests in our daily lives, understand that. From that point onward, I don't ever want to hear subjective or objective again. Ever. You don't need to give this big explanation to qualify what you mean by objective, because you don't have to say objective in the first place. Just say this is good. Just say this is bad, and then give reasons. That's it. People practically will use objectively to say, like, One Piece is objectively good. They will say that, and what they're doing is they're trying to put One Piece in a class above everything else. Again, I think this just leads to a kind of elitism. People want to privilege certain things that they like more over others, and this is just like a way to try and leverage that and to just really put other anime down. Blah blah blah. I don't care. I think it's bullshit. I think it's toxic. I think it does not do anything productive. I think it's philosophically incorrect. I think it's incoherent ultimately. Just say this is good. Just say you think this thing's better than another, and that's it. It doesn't have to be subjective. Doesn't have to be objective. Just fucking say it, and then give some reasons. Argue about it. Talk about it. Have discourse. Discussion about it. Or don't say anything. Shut up if you want. I don't care. At the end of the day, once we all agree that it's subjective, we don't have to say it's objectively good or subjectively good. Just say it's fucking good or not. Like, it's good because of this. Or say it's conventionally good. Or say, like, yeah, you don't even need to say it's conventional. Just say why you think it's good. In what respect? I think it's good because it has, like, you don't have to say, I think it's good because it has good character development, and character development is something that I value. You don't have to say, I think this is good because it has character development, and character development is something that the community values. You just have to say, I think this is good because of its character development. Like, who cares who thinks that character development is good? Just say it, give your argument. If somebody wants to question whether or not something is valuable, then so be it. I just don't think that I just don't think you need to have, like, the qualifier subjective or objective at any point in an argument. Once you've established it's all subjective, I think it's more confusing. I think it sparks this, in my opinion at this point, redundant debate about whether art is subjective or objective, when I think it's already been solved. I think the answer's already there. I think I've done my part in presenting that theory to you. We should all just accept it, and just proceed, like, accordingly. We don't need to say it's subjective, blah, 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 blah. You're wasting your time. It's subjective, move on. Now we can actually talk about the anime. Why is Naruto good? Give your reasons. It doesn't have to be objectively good, it doesn't have to be subjectively good. I'm gonna keep fucking saying it because it's so stupid at this point. Yeah. Sorry, I don't remember what I was originally talking about, but we don't need to say it. Accept it's all subjective, and then move on. Give arguments. That's it. That's all I want to hear. That's it. The video is now over. We're at 7 concurrent viewers. We're now at 5 viewers. Okay? This has been a blast, but there's nothing else for me to talk in the video. This will be the last time that I give the whole objective-subjective thing a spin. I think I have covered it sufficiently. I don't know. I think I've entertained so many potential objections to this, and not one has done anything by means of convincing me I am wrong. Hello, Paul A. I think you finally got to the point I had towards the very beginning. Bruh, do we have to argue this? It's just subjective. Yeah. The only reason I even argued it in the first place is because even though everyone says it's all subjective, they don't actually understand what they're saying. And I'm trying to just enlighten them. You know what I mean? And there still are like the good handful of people that think it is objective, and I'm just trying to like shake them. Ultimately, I think objectivity is a dogma. I think if you maintain that dogma, you're just being irrational, and I don't think it's worth having the conversation with you about whether art is subjective or objective. But at the end of the day, when you are practically talking about an anime, you don't have to say it's subjectively good or objectively good. Just fucking say it's good and then talk about it. That's my ultimate moral of this story. So if you take away anything from My Name's Doofy, it's my theory that everything is subjective. Okay, well, not that. It's my theory that aesthetic evaluation is subjective, and now shut up and move on. Like, that's it. That's all I want you to take away from me. Now talk about the anime. Give your reasons. That's it. Totally agree with you, Doofy. Everything's subjective, and there's nothing really wrong with that. Yeah, exactly. Like, we can have better or worse explanations for things. Like, we can have more or less textual support, and we can evaluate an argument based on how good the justification is for them. But, like, the fact that it's all subjective does not take away from how good an argument can be argued or how poorly an argument can be argued. Subjective does not mean equal. And that's a common misconception amongst these objectivists, as I've been calling them. Motherfuckers really want to be like, and this is what Saad does all the time too. He's like, well, if it's not all objective, it's all subjective. And I'm like, bro, that's a false dichotomy, okay? It's actually both. It's a blend of both. The material we are actually watching and talking about is objective, but what we choose to value is subjective. I don't know what else you want me to tell me, bro. Like, just be right. Just listen to My Name's Doofy. He's got that shit in a bag. Particular just in entertainment? What do you mean by that? But I mean that takes care of my review of that video. I think at this point, if you've watched everything that I've done on YouTube, if you've talked with me, if you understood what I've said, we should be 99% on the same page, and we are now ready to just talk about anime. We don't need to talk about objective this, subjective that. My name is Doofy, and this stream is now over. Thank you all for watching. I love you all. Let's get to 1,000 subs by the end of the month. Let's get to 4,000 hours of watch time by the end of the month. I believe we can do it. Peace and love, people. Wait. I just meant we're judgy. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay, God, I have to make another thumbnail. Please do. Please make a thumbnail. I'd appreciate it. Anyways, thank you all for coming by for 2 hours to hear me ramble. I think this was great fun. But, yeah, peace.